Greetings one and all, I'm vk3sl and welcome to our afternoon program. A little bit of a late start today, and we've been listening to the music of Pablo Casals, recorded at one of the Prads festivals in the 1950s and released on a Philips EP. Well, I'm a little bit late starting today because we're catching up with some people, and I'm not sure if Frank's aware of my movements, so we'll just keep channel open and we'll see what happens. Other than that, I'll just persevere with program material. So, name of the game, testing for volume and clarity on 160 and on 40 meters, along with UHF stream and also virtual stream on a dedicated YouTube space to these missions. Part of a long-standing tradition of a kind. And what we'll do now is hear some theremin. We, in the past, have celebrated the remarkable creative exploits of Mr. Gregory Blanc, fabulous theremin player, and we have him here playing in a recent upload, an elegy by Frank Bridge. Gregory Blanc and an elegy by Frank Bridge, theremin and piano. Remarkable achievement. All those pitch changes were made in free air, so an incredibly exact spatial positioning required with the left hand of the performer. Or is it the right hand? Let me see. Might be, no, left hand. Yeah. So incredible to observe. And a remarkable instrument with its continuous tone feature. Okay, folks, well, looks like Frank may not be around. I can probably give him a ring because I am late starting. But what I might do while I sort out a few things is play something of which is I'm quite keen to check in with. It's popped up in the last few days. It's from the BBC archive, and it's a retro tech feature and it's called the Milton Babbitt and the Music Machine Monitor, dating back to 1962. And Babbitt's quoted, he was a composer by the way, he says here, "No musical instrument can play in this register with both this speed and this kind of envelope." That's Mr. Babbitt's quote. And the article goes on to say that Hugh Weldon visits the engineering department at the University of Columbia, where Milton Babbitt, a mathematician and music theorist who is one of the world's leading composers of electronic music, is hard at work on the extraordinary RCA Mark II synthesizer. Babbitt is testing both the limits of the machine itself and the limits of human perception. What can we learn from this remarkable music machine that can produce sequences of sounds that greatly exceed the performing capacity of any musician using conventional instruments? So this clip is taken from Monitor, originally broadcast on BBC TV on the 30th of September 1962. So from the BBC archives, let's have this retro tech feature, and for the next 20 minutes or so. And I'm vk3sl, and you're listening to a test program on 160, 40, and also on UHF.
In the name of the lost who clarion, the Swedish plains a carrion, under the burial song of the birds of burden, heavy with the drown and the grain dust, and bearing the ghost from the ground like pollen on the black.
There are plenty of musicians who, not without reason, are very sceptical of Milton Babbitt and what he stands for, but at the same time, there's no doubt that what he builds up out of this machine is also taken seriously by all sorts of people, including non-electronic composers like Stravinsky, as well as the electronic boys themselves.
My heart
Bethany, shall we try it again?
Is it true that this machine can produce any sound whatsoever?
This is a machine which is designed solely for the purpose of creating any imaginable sound, or I should say, for electronically creating any imaginable sound that the operator, preferably the composer, knows how to specify. And he must specify it in a kind of detail that has never been possible or necessary before. For example, a sound such as this. In very much the same way, but from a different source, he may create sounds which are not so much musical sounds as perhaps percussive noise sounds, such as this.
Is there any limit to this? You can play all these things simultaneously, I suppose, if you want to.
You can play them all simultaneously, if you'll forgive my American pronunciation, if you are prepared to then go to the programming equipment. You can't do these simultaneously only because this is merely for test, merely for the composer to discover what he has informed the machine to do. But he hasn't yet informed it in succession until he has gone to the programming equipment. To effect succession, to effect simultaneity, then he must go to the programming equipment.
By the programming equipment, you mean this typewriter?
I mean this punch device. The punches are simply nothing more than numerical instructions to the machine to produce certain things which the composer has already established within the electronics of the machine.
Yes, so that you, as it were, type messages to the machine saying, this is what I want.
Precisely.
And then what comes out in the end can be multiple sound or single sounds, depending on what you set.
Absolutely. After we have committed it to tape. Tape functions here purely for purposes of storage, as it would in any conventional recording studio.
Yeah. What sort of sound eventually comes out, then? Say you do, say it's multiple. You're not just using single.
In that case, the best thing for me to do is to play the very beginning of a new composition of mine, of which you will hear more, I trust, later on.
are you really composing primarily, or exploring the new combinations of new sounds?
The answer is yes to both questions. But the new sounds aspect is not the most important one. I think you will find that for most composers, although they may be originally seduced by the notion of new sounds, and certainly the inventor of a machine such as this perhaps thinks that that is the paramount importance of his invention, the fact is that nothing becomes as old as quickly as a new sound. Composers who turn to this kind of demanding equipment are less concerned with new sound than with what they consider more fundamental aspects of musical composition. The control of time in all of its aspects and all of its manifestations. Because time here is represented by length along this paper tape. That kind of control we've never had before.
You'll have to spell that out for me, if you will, on the machine.
Well, rather than attempting to do it directly on the machine, perhaps I can do it more dramatically, if what you might consider less legitimately, with an example that I've already recorded. Now, this is a purely electronic synthesis of a very familiar work, the opening measures of the F major two-part invention of Bach. Let me emphasize that there is no attempt here to do anything with imitative tone color. Indeed, this is the most neutral kind of electronic color. We're concerned here with the time factor, which we have been discussing. So first, let's hear it at a fairly reasonably fast tempo. Now that simply represents a punching out, a key punching out on the programming input. Now without any further punching whatsoever, the same thing was run through at twice the speed. Remember, the speed will affect only the speed and nothing else. And here it is at a tempo which far exceeds any known human capacities. Now, there is one instance. Now, another instance would be this. With exactly the same punching again, we can throw one toggle switch and produce the following result. And I trust you will forgive me and understand that this is purely for demonstration, a demonstration which will not involve the notion of what kind of music is electronic music. The familiar example is so that the unfamiliarity will be more thoroughly emphasized in the more relevant domain. You can see that here the pitch level of what would be in normal performance, the left hand, has been automatically altered. Yeah. And we can produce a much more complex result of the same kind, and this will demonstrate something else in the realm of time, precision of ensemble. There we had four voices, all resulting from re-recordings of the same key punching. Now, another aspect of time, and one that concerns many contemporary composers. I can mention specifically Stravinsky. This has to do with complex tempo relationships. So we'll hear now that same, if you wish, right hand again. But when the left hand enters, it proceeds at a tempo which is 5/4 faster than its preceding tempo, or the tempo of the right hand. Finally, one other and very different kind of mutation which can be effected immediately and automatically by the machine. The whole composition is transposed down an octave, and the tone color is changed ever so slightly by merely altering the upper harmonics. Nothing more than that. It's a very, very slight change. It produces not a particularly electronic or, if you wish, far-out sound. What it produces, rather, is something which, for all its modesty of sound, could not be produced by any known musical instrument. No musical instrument can play in this register with both this speed and this kind of envelope. And there you have it.
I like that. Play it again.
Would you like to hear it again? You'll have to wait for me to rewind.
No difficulty. As far as I'm concerned, I like that last one because it simply seems to me a pleasant musical experience. But I'm not at all clear why it is that you're doing all these other ones. I mean, presumably you could make the left hand go 80 times as fast, or 27 times as fast, or so I wouldn't hear. But why bother?
Well, this, of course, is merely for very simple demonstration of what the machine can do, what the machine's capacities are in the very simple sense. It's also to overcome the...
But what point is there in the machine doing it?
Oh, the point in the machine doing it is that these are all, with these rudimentary materials, with these, if you wish, inappropriate materials, demonstrations of kinds of techniques in which composers have been interested in non-electronic music. Any composer who responsibly turns to the composition of electronic music, be it on this machine or anything comparable, must be involved at some time or another, probably preceding his composition and during his composition, with research. What can, I think, in all accuracy be termed basic research? Because he is dealing with the irreducible ingredient. He's research in two things: in the nature of musical sound, and above all, the nature of the perception of musical sound. Because after all, the conventional composer, and I use this term purely to describe a composer who writes for non-electronic instruments, will very often have to ask himself the question, does what I have composed exceed the performing capacities of the instrument and of the performer? Now, the composer who writes for a medium such as this has to ask himself a very different question. Does what I have created, does what I can create, exceed the perceptual and conceptual capacities of the trained listener? Because the hand is very, very seldom faster than the ear, but electronic speeds are far faster than the ear. And electronic instruments such as this can produce discriminations, differentiations, which far exceed the discriminative capacities of the ear.
It can produce sounds that my ear simply can't hear.
It can produce sounds that your ear perhaps cannot hear, or will hear in a completely different way from the specifications, as we would normally regard them, as kinds of notations. Now, may I show you an example of this?
Yeah.
For example, here is simply a single line, a single succession of notes. You might ask yourself how many different notes are being played in this very short time interval. But I will tell you that this reaches just about the threshold of perception for the most thoroughly trained musician. Now, if I should ask you how many different events you heard in that succession of time, which was about a second, what would you answer?
Play it again.
Oh, I'd be delighted.
$18.
18 is a very good guess. There happen to have been 24. And it is true that we are now reaching just the limits of perception. We know that if we repeat that example a few times, a thoroughly trained musician can take down every one of those notes, though this far exceeds the capacity of any human performer or any musical instrument. But now suppose we change the tone color, change the octave, and have another succession of notes. How many pitches did you hear there? Let's try it again.
Well, I suppose about, what was your idea? 11.
Ooh, that's a very, very good guess. Actually, of course, there are 12. But if you actually heard 11 notes, then you were the most perfect subject. About 11. You were the most perfect subject we have ever had. The musician will usually guess 6 or 7. Now, we have specified 12. We know that there are 12. We know that 12 are emanating from the loudspeaker. We can test that by other means. But we have found no musician who can take down all of those 12 notes, for all that they were at the same speed as the preceding succession. We also know exactly why they choose to hear the notes that they do. This is something that could never have been done before, but something that must be done with the use of these instruments and in order to be able to use these instruments to the full of their capacities. Listen to the same thing again, a little slower. You heard more notes?
Yes, I think so.
You should have. And slower? More notes creeping in?
Yeah.
Now we're going to play it at half of the original speed, and you should be able eventually to hear all 12 notes with perfect precision. We're back below the threshold. And that is it.
Now, you personally don't use this machine, do you, above all for research, but rather primarily for composing?
The two are at the moment inextricably connected. There's no doubt about that. We have to do research. We are doing research, in a sense, every moment that we compose. We are never quite sure of what we are going to get by way of result as long as we are doing something that we have never done explicitly before, and that seldom comes to pass. Rather, at every moment that we're composing, we are trying, we are doing research. We are doing a certain amount of research before we compose and while we compose. But of course, the primary study here is that of musical composition and musical compositions.
How long does it take actually to learn to handle this machine?
This, of course, depends a great deal on the composer's background. If he has a certain amount of technological, mathematical, physical, acoustical background, he could learn to operate this machine, perhaps not to his own satisfaction, but to operate it up to a certain extent within about 6 months. To master the machine, I haven't mastered it, and to my knowledge, no one has.
How long have you been working on it?
I've been working at this machine in more or less what has to be spare time from teaching for about 3 years.
Are you a mathematician?
I have been a professional mathematician.
Are you more of a mathematician than you are a musician?
There are those who would say yes. I would insist no. I could invoke the years of training in music and the number of musical compositions as opposed to the number of mathematical papers which I have produced, which are none, though some people regard my musical papers as mathematical.
Most of your original and early music was, of course, conventional music.
Some of my music still is for conventional instruments, if not conventional music.
All right, for conventional instruments. Now, why is it that you personally have been so drawn into this particular field for composition?
Well,
I mean, were you dissatisfied?
Well, I think in this case I can answer not only for myself, but for many of my fellow composers who have turned to this very demanding and difficult medium. It's not that we did not know what to do. It's that we knew exactly what we wanted to do, and this kind of medium provided the only means for doing this. Again, I would insist that this was not so much in the realm of new sounds, but in the realm of control of what, in very general terms, we could call the rhythmic factors of music and the loudness factors of music, which we simply cannot control in conventional performance. I must add something else.
I mean, you mean that a piano or an orchestra is too insensitive for your demand?
It's not too insensitive. That sounds like a qualitative description. It simply has its inherent physical limitations. And we are making what we consider reasonable musical demands which transcend these limitations. But if I may, I would like to add one practical note, and that is that in this country at least, everything militates against the composition of complex contemporary music. The long, largely unrewarded hours of composition, the problems involved in copying the parts, in preparing the score, in the most material aspects, then the insufficient number of rehearsals, and as a result, the usually inadequate performance. We are being saved from that.
You're being driven economically to compose electronically.
In a sense, of course, this may seem rather paradoxical when you consider the possible and probable cost of a machine such as this. I am very lucky to have this available to me. But we see composers turning to much simpler, much more laborious and tedious methods of electronic composition for this reason, among more profound musical ones.
Why is it that when you have a machine like this, which, as you say, can produce any conceivable sound, why is it that so much of the electronic music that is produced seems to have a similar quality of idiom? If I can be rude about it, it belongs a little, one feels, to the squeak and gibber school, so to speak. I mean, to put it in another way, the kind of words one associates all too frequently with electronic music are words like bloop and bleep, aren't they?
Yes, well, I think that can be attributed to the fact that this, again, was the composer's choice, and the composers to whom you're referring were not working with a machine such as this, but working with much more simple material. That is, with material in which they were obliged to splice together each independent musical, that is, electronically made sound, and effect succession in that way. Now, obviously, they were immediately intrigued by the possibilities of juxtaposing unlikely sounds, of producing speeds of succession which were impossible before.
Yes,
now, this
simply because this was new.
This was new in the very same sense which I think in the early days of film, people were deeply intrigued by the possibility of a car moving backwards far faster than it could move forwards, or a diver who dove from the pool back to the diving board. These were all very intriguing, but they didn't serve to either set the tone of the future movie or, above all, to discredit the film as an art.
No, this was learning the business.
Learning the business and being intrigued by certain things which could not have been done before, which could be done in no other way. Once the novelty had worn off, they turned to more serious things.
Can I put what I'm sure must have been put to you on thousands of occasions? Are you bothered? Does it occur to you to think that there is a kind of dehumanized aspect about the sounds?
I don't quite know what that means. Now, if someone means by this simply as trivial a thing as the fact that these sounds are created by this machine, which consists of electronic tubes and copper wires and metal, as opposed to another kind of musical machine which is made up of ivory and copper wires and metal, then of course I don't attempt to answer what I regard as an absurd question. If, on the other hand, they are saying that some of these sounds do not have the richness of dimension, if you wish, of conventional sounds, then they're right. In certain respects, this is still true. Remember, we are just beginning.
It isn't just richness of dimension, is it? I mean, behind the piano, you feel the presence of the pianist. There's
well, you should feel the presence of a composer here who simply happens to be at this moment also his own performer. Now, if it sounds in some sense dehumanized, perhaps it's also because you cannot see a performer. That we can never supply. There's something a little, I would say, unnatural, even undesirable about entering a concert hall and being confronted by a row of speakers. I think this is inappropriate, and eventually we hope that everyone will have good equipment, and then we'll simply send our tapes to the interested people to be heard at their leisure and as many times as they wish. I do not take the aspect of the human element very seriously, except that it represents, if you wish, a criticism of the kind of sound that we are able to produce at a very early stage of development.
Yes, but the criticism is of your head, not of the machine.
Yes, if they are criticizing my head and saying that it is somehow non-human, I can only offer my head.
Yes, yes.
For example, let me take this opportunity to play the beginning of my latest work, which is not yet finished, Ensembles for Synthesizer. Now, this work is written for 4 tracks to issue from 4 separate loudspeakers, and that's an integral part of the compositional conception, the spatial distribution, which I can now completely control. Now, you'll be hearing it as it issues from 1 loudspeaker. This is not, in any sense of the word, my work as it was completely conceived, but nevertheless, it is my work.
Okay. There we have Milton Babbitt and his unabashed examination of contemporary music.
What a beauty.
What a maverick.
What's his name?
Milton Babbitt.
Okay.
Yeah, he was one of the pioneering brigade of electronic composers. He lived into his 90s. He only died fairly recently. Died in 2011, born in 1916. And
When was that recording made?
1962.
62?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's from the BBC archives.
Yeah, no, it's most interesting.
It is very interesting. He's so self-assured.
The reaction of the interviewer was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was quite clever. You could. There's a bit of a body language giveaway there. It was a little bit of. He was trying to sort of take the piss a little bit, but
a bit.
Yeah, a bit of, but like the squiz and gibber.
Yeah, that was kind of his high point, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was, but it's probably a necessary conversation. You know, you get these very academic approaches. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and he was a major figure, Milton Babbitt, in his sphere.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And he had
perfectly legit to do that.
Yes, and he went in his very slightly neurodiverse way. He explained himself, and I thought it was quite fascinating, actually.
Oh, look, it totally was.
Yeah, in fact, there's a film of him in his later years,
yes,
talking about similar subjects. We'll hear him at the other end of his life. Here he goes. This is quite short.
Oh, that'd be good.
And Milton Babbitt here on the lure of technology, and he looks like he might be in his 80s or 90s here.
Look, when I turned to the electronic medium, not only was I fascinated by it, I'm going to use that cliche to challenge, because it was. I had to work for years before I could manage that instrument in any way that I regarded as satisfactory. But the truth is that I did like the notion of, walking into that studio with a piece in my head and walking out with a completely performed work in that little tape under my arm. I love to work in isolation, let me say that. I love to compose in isolation, though I've often composed, as Gunther Schuller has, on subways. I like the idea of being able to stand there and redo and redo and redo. If I had that kind of rehearsal time with an orchestra, then I'd probably feel the same way. I think there's a real practical consideration there. Except for some very close friends, I never got the performances I wanted. And that certainly was one of the aspects of it. But I loved working with the synthesizer. I just liked it.
There we go. There's Milton Babbitt at the other end of his life, reflecting on his career.
What did he win his Pulitzer Prize for, do you know?
I'm just reading it here. His biography: Babbitt was born in Philadelphia. Says he was raised Jackson, Mississippi. Studied violin. Early attracted to jazz and theatre music. I'm just going through the thing here. A Jackson newspaper called Babbitt a whiz kid and noted that he had perfect pitch and could add up his family grocery bills in his head. In his teens, he became a great fan of jazz cornet player Big Spiderbeck.
There you go.
Yeah. Babbitt's father was a mathematician. Babbitt intended to study mathematics and transferred to New York University. Now, what does it say about his... during the Second World War, he divided his time between mathematical research, a member of mathematical faculties, he returned to Princeton's musical faculty in 1973. Julia, where's this mentioned at the beginning of the article about his Pulitzer Prize? And I want to see what he got it for. Guggenheim Fellowship. Now, it's an important question to answer, but I'm just trying to find it here in the bio.
Yeah.
Without success so far.
Don't worry.
I might scan this article and see if I can definitively answer that, because it's a very long article, and it did say Honours and Awards. Here we go. Pulitzer Prize special citation for his life work as a distinguished and seminal American composer in 1982.
There you are.
There we go. That answers the question. But yes, he got a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship in 1960, and it's a litany of honours. There's another film. I'm sort of quite fascinated. I'm drawn into this. So
totally.
Let's just keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
There is another discussion with him where he's demonstrating electronic music. This is from 1966. I'm not sure what the source is, but maybe we'll just find out what this is about in two parts. So perhaps we can comment in between each part.
Right.
But let's hear Milton Babbitt, the demonstration on electronic music, 1966, Part 1. With a slow start. Oh, it's an old film. The title says electronic music in bold type.
One of the turning points of the 20th century has been the advent of electronics. Industry has made full use of it. Man's ventures into space depend on it. And in the world of the arts, electronics has opened the way for a new form of expression, electronic music. A brilliant technical advance has been put to artistic use so successfully that electronic music is now regarded as one of the most significant developments in American music since World War II. Composers who once wrote for conventional instrumental and voice combinations are eagerly embracing this new medium, and they are obtaining new raw materials for the sounds they use. But more important, they have developed new means of controlling and organizing their compositions as well. in order to satisfy a long-felt need for ultimate and total control of the process of composing music. Before we hear some of this music, we are going to meet the distinguished American composer Milton Babbitt, who will play us some examples of electronic music and describe for us the different ways this music can be composed. Mr. Babbitt is a writer, lecturer, professor of music at Princeton, a resident of New York City, and a man widely considered to be America's foremost composer of electronic music. Mr. Babbitt, what are the several ways that electronic music can be made?
Well, as we shall see, there are three fundamentally different methods for the electronic production of sound, and thus one hopes music. The most familiar is that which centers around the properties of the tape machine, the ability of the tape machine to store music, sound, if you wish, in that particular form that we see before us. Now, when one deals with the tape machine, there are two possible methods of operating on a signal. The signal can be pre-recorded, or the signal can be purely electronic. And we're going to begin with the unprepossessing recording of a door squeaking, such as this. And now we're going to see how the tape machine itself can operate upon this signal. Let me hasten to say that I do not regard this as a musical composition. It does show some of the procedures that composers who work in this medium have employed on perhaps more impressive signals. Listen to what happens when we change the speed of the tape machine. This changes pitch, also changes the tone color of that door squeak. And then we'll hear what happens as we splice, as we separate these sounds, making little rhythmic patterns of them, transforming them entirely as, if you wish, physical tape materials.
Could something as simple as that become a composition?
It could become a kind of composition. I, for one, would probably not find it a very satisfactory one until a great deal more were done. But it is technically true that any sound can be transformed into any other sound by virtue of the tape medium. Now here we're going to hear a musical sound, the lowest note of the piano recorded in a normal way, transformed very simply merely to show again what can be done to pitch and to tone color by the tape medium itself. Now that was all done with a single sound. Therefore, of course, one can create by mixing a very complex texture, different textures, all from that single initial sound.
Now, do we have a piece of music that can that demonstrates how this kind of technique works?
Yes, the piece that we're going to hear, it's going to be the opening of a work entitled "Of Wood and Brass." It was composed by Vladimir Ussachevsky, who, by the way, prepared the preceding examples as well. Vladimir has often worked with this particular method of pre-recording individual sounds from instruments, usually from instrumental sources, often from vocal sources, and then putting together his composition, literally putting it together by creating succession, transformation, mutation through these tape methods. The very title of Wood and Brass indicates the source of this particular composition. The wood is the xylophone, the brass are the conventional brass instruments, trumpet, horn, and trombone. We're going to hear the opening portion of this work.
Mr. Babbitt, was it tape that started electronic music? Is that what got it going? got people
No,
interested?
as it turns out, not at all, because it was obvious that one could create music purely, if you wish, synthetically, as soon as it was realized that you could record music. Once it was clear that you could record sound, that you could record music in every sense of the word, in the most elaborate sense of the word, on a disc, it was equally clear that all of that music was contained in the undulating grooves of a disc. Therefore, you could have created the sound by simply incising grooves. Now, that's not a very practical method, but a much more practical one was that was revealed by the fact that sound could also be recorded on the side of a film track, in a variable area film track. One could have drawn those, if you wish, waveforms and created all the sound that was recorded there and a great deal that could not have been recorded there. This was indeed developed to a very high degree of sophistication in the 1920s. But composers, for a good musical reason apparently, were not aware of this. At least were not particularly interested in it. They saw no reason to spend valuable time, valuable energy on the merely possible. Now today, many composers find these possibilities necessities for, again, deeply centrally musical reasons. The particular attractions of this resource correspond to their compositional needs. So it is true that after the Second World War, the fact of tape storage, combined with a much more fundamental fact, a concern with the control of musical time, with musical and compositional needs, led to this conjunction, which has, of course, gone far beyond the capacities of the tape machine or of tape methods.
Well, now we've heard how natural sounds stored on tape can be converted into music. What are the other ways of
Well, the
making
first
music?
way that involves exactly the same kind of medium, the tape medium, begins, however, from a purely electronic origin. In other words, not from a sound. It was never sound. It was electronic oscillations, and indeed an oscillator. And that was imposed on the tape, and the composer begins from that as his material rather than from a pre-recorded sound. That is the kind of work we're going to hear now.
Let us now hear a portion of Mario Davidovsky's study number 2. We have chosen to illustrate its musical flow with dance. Our dancer in choreography is Judith Haskell. Mario Davidovsky's study number 2. One of the most interesting recent developments in electronic music is the introduction of computer-produced sound. Mr. Babbitt, what does a computer do for you? Is it composing for you in any sense?
No, just as we are not speaking about performance machines, that is about electronic organs or, if you wish, amplified guitars, we are not speaking of composing machines in any sense. The computer and all of the devices of which we are speaking today, the tape machine and eventually the synthesizer, do that and only that which the composer specifies, and in detail, in a degree of detail and with a degree of precision and completeness that were impossible in the past and indeed unnecessary in the past. We are speaking now of sound produced by specifications given on punched cards to a high-speed digital computer. There is a program that was developed at Bell and later at Princeton, which makes it possible for the composer to specify normal musical instructions as one thinks of musical instructions in terms of pitch, duration, and so forth. Feed these to a digital computer. This creates a digital tape, which is transformed in turn into a magnetic tape, which then is performable on a machine of this sort. We're going to hear a portion of a work, a very elaborate work produced by a computer, by James Randall. It is entitled Mudgett, the Memoirs of a Mass Murderer, and therefore there is a text. Let me point out that when the voice enters, no one should infer that this was a computer-synthesized voice. It was just a normal recorded female voice, then later combined with itself speaking. This is just a simple process of re-recording. There was no tape modification or tape tampering of any sort.
Okay, that's the end of part one. Milton Babbitt describing his description. Sorry, Frank, there we go. Demonstration on electronic music, 1966. Now, sorry, I was actually called inside and I missed some of that, the last 5 minutes of it. But it seemed reasonably comprehensive, and it's one of those situations where composers are trying to explain a completely new idiom, or an idiom that's not necessarily in the consciousness of conventional music listeners, and it's quite a niche sort of subject. So I'm planted here now so I can continue listening, and what we'll do is we'll move on, and just for the sake of completeness, and I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, we'll hear the remainder of this program. So Milton Babbitt is the composer, and we'll hear now part 2, demonstration on electronic music. I'm vk3sl and we're testing.
Mr. Babbitt, I find that as I listen to a lot of electronic music that I find myself so wrapped up in the sound that it's hard for me to hear the music. The sound refers back to science fiction film soundtracks and that kind of thing. Is this a problem in your composing work?
Well, if you hear it this way, then I do regard it as a significant problem. Because I think if there's one generalization I can make about all of the composers, or at least most of the composers who are working in these media, it is that they are not particularly interested in new sounds as such. There's nothing that becomes as old as quickly as a new sound, or one that has such, if you wish, tired connotations, as you yourself have just indicated. We did not turn to this medium in order to get, if you wish, new kicks from the world of sound. On the contrary, we were concerned with something very, very different, and that is the control of time in music. I don't mean this in any metaphysical sense. I mean it in a very practical, realistic sense. Look at the tape machine. You can control time by measurable length along the reel. In all of the cases of the computer, and as we shall see in the synthesizer, time is specifiable to any degree of accuracy. Now, that is not possible in conventional instruments. They provide automatic or semi-automatic means of, let's say, pitch control, but no comparable means of time control. So as composers became more and more concerned with rhythm in every sense of the word, speed and flexibility of succession, the time rate of change of loudness, such aspects of music which are realistic and perceptible but not controllable, then they turned to this medium that would provide it. Composers didn't turn to the electronic medium because they didn't know what else to do. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and this was the only means of doing it.
Well, now, as we've begun to see what the real virtue for the composer of the electronic media is control in many dimensions. Is
Precisely.
That a good conclusion?
That's indeed the central conclusion. The composer wants to be master of his composition from beginning almost to the end. I say almost because this is music which, by its very nature, must emanate from loudspeakers, and we can't control what happens very often in those loudspeakers and, above all, in the room after that point. This may seem petty, but it's not. It's crucial, after all. So we haven't solved all the problems of performance by turning to this medium, but we have solved the problems of specifications. We create our works from the beginning. We, in a sense, copy our scores, rehearse the works, produce the work, and it's there on that tape. That is our work.
Another word keeps coming up. We've heard something about the role of the computer in this kind of music, but you are known as a composer on something called a synthesizer. Can you tell us something about what it is?
The synthesizer, which we're now discussing last, I think for a good strategic reason, was developed by RCA. Indeed, it's known as the RCA electronic, well, I call it sound synthesizer rather than music synthesizer to avoid so-called aesthetic controversy. The sound synthesizer looks very much like a computer. Many people are likely to think that it is a computer. It's a large piece of equipment, many pieces of equipment indeed, and it has a programming input. And the composer sits in front of this little keyboard and indicates to the machine by punching holes in paper tape all of his musical instructions. And nothing is preset. He must decide what those instructions mean. He must decide everything. But it is not a computer. It can't compute. It has no memory devices, for which it may be grateful. It is not, in any sense of the word, an operator on this information. What it does is serve as a switching circuit. The programming goes in, and what that programming controls are components very much like the components of a tape studio: oscillators, filters, envelope controls, and the like. The difference is this, that succession and every aspect of specification is controlled by a programming input.
Now, and yet in this a piece of yours that we are about to hear, you have added a voice, a human voice,
Yes.
which performs live.
Yes, and not in the case of the Randall piece where the voice was recorded. This is meant for live voice to be performed with it. This is the setting of a 12-stanza shape poem of Dylan Thomas called Vision and Prayer, and I was simply interested in the combination of the human voice, which I would not want to synthesize at this moment, related to both psychologically and musically to this totally synthesized tape track.
Let us, here is Vision and Prayer, performed for us by Milton Babbitt and soprano Ethel Casey.
In the name of the law, glory in the finest place of Orion. Under the burial song of the face of Satan, heavy with the green dust, and bearing round like fallen on the black cliff and the beak of lime. I praise, I beat on the holy plasma thinking, but sure was within the inmost marrow of my husband, that he will learn now the sun and moon, his mother's milk may return before the lips and bloom to the best forever behind the woodland bone and be dumb and a room infant light on prison yawned to his footstopping in the main mountain, lost on prison mountain. In the sense of dark I pray him. Then let the dead light moon for his briar hand to hasten to the shrine of his first wound, and the blood drop pardon, angel of the sun, blind, to sleep in the dark and deep rock. Let it break and deep by the sun, and the beating dust be blown down to the revolting face of the night forever falling.
You've just heard a portion of Milton Babbitt's Vision and Prayer, performed by Mr. Babbitt and Ethel Casey, soprano. And our special thanks are due to Miss Casey for her performance of an exacting role, to Miss Judith Haskell for preparing the dance portion of the program, and to Mr. Milton Babbitt, composer, for helping us organize this program. As we have seen, electronic music gives composers a control and an organizing ability they never had, and it gives them sources for new sounds. Already, composers have produced a substantial number of significant works, and just as the invention of the piano made possible music that could have been written for no other instrument, so it is with electronics. The important thing to keep in mind is that electronic music promises the future an entirely new musical literature without eliminating the masterpieces of the past.
And so ends this episode of Electronic Music.
Wow.
Fascinating.
It's very Stockhausen, isn't it?
Yes, it is in a way. And I'm sort of, I have a sort of a soft spot for him, really. I think it's a pretty hard call, you know, with music and its evolution and the expectations of masses. We sort of form a sense of what music is to our how it moves our sensibilities.
Yeah.
And this is like an academic extension. This is like taking it to the next logical conclusion. But of course, it's nothing to do with that soul with that inextricable thing that we feel in music when we hear a performance that sort of has a echo in the, you know, all music's before it.
Sure.
That's not obvious here. When you hear a great blues singer or a great, you know, there's something sort of so earthy and connecting. There's an essence. There's a humanity behind it. And
that's what the guy meant when he was interviewing. He couldn't quite get that through, I don't think.
I think it's really hard because it's so abstracted. It's an academic next step, and I can see that too, and I can understand how some people really find that exciting. And there's a part of me who wants to connect with that and just sort of hear it and with a different set of ears and just sort of just feel some connection with that sound world, or just surf the wave, so to speak.
I think part of the trouble is needing to define whether it's music or not. Doesn't matter what you call it. They're just interesting sounds.
Absolutely, it is, and it's complex rhythms, and it's rhythmically quite arresting. It
can be all of that and more, you know.
Yeah, it certainly can, and tone sort of structures that would never be heard in any other context.
I used to be fascinated, and still am, by hearing machinery. Of various sorts. We had factories in South Melbourne. It was an industrial area, and I grew up going past these little factories and all sorts of really fascinating things as a kid to listen to.
Yeah, I can fully understand. You'd hear the sort of internal rhythmic
rhythms
sort of
and tonal textural things.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. Industrial sounds that became really important in the early music of Prokofiev and Stravinsky. You know, the music concrete. Trying to sort of embrace the industrial sounds as well. Look, I think poor old Milton was up against it a bit there, and he was trying to sort of really put himself forward, and he became a bit wooden, and I won't say that. No, that's not the right thing to say. But he was trying to sort of use very academic approach to sort of defining his aesthetic.
Yeah.
But you know, where else can he go? You know, this is his world, and it's another world. It's a parallel world, and it's an extension of music as we know it, and it all still has its derivatives, but it's of a different kind. And I'm hearing a lot about it because Henry's doing the Lucerne Festival at the moment, and he's playing a lot of bull airs and hyper complex music.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
It's just insane. It's just I just look at the scores and I think, how can anyone conduct or read this? And it's just hundreds of hours of rehearsals. He's working now 10, 12 hours a day, working through the stuff, just working through the rhythms, just working through this, and again, it relates to what we've just heard. It's about rhythm essentially. That's its sort of primal construct, and you know, it's a sound world. It's interesting, and but yeah, it's not necessarily tenable for so many people because we just don't. You know, we don't evolve through that sort of type of understanding. We look for music which has got melody and melodic shape, and you know, there's an aesthetic which in music which is so allied to our speech and our emotions, our raw emotions, our humanity. That this is something else. And so, yeah.
You can have both.
I think you can. I think you can have both. And I think there's room for both. And I think it's really important. One of my objectives in sort of doing this whole missions thing was, you might remember in the very early days, I played a lot of this sort of stuff.
Good, very well. I used to be fascinated as well.
Yeah, well, I found I needed to try and understand it a bit more, and I wanted to understand that especially first generation of electronic sort of composers, and we listened to quite a bit of Stockhausen, and then we went through that cycle of looking at female composers associated with
British ones.
Yeah, British ones who work with the BBC archives and such. BBC sound, the
Daphne.
Daphne
Lady.
Yeah, and so then we looked at all of that, but I think that what was it called? What's the BBC Sound Studios? They did all the Doctor Who things.
BBC Workshop.
Well, yeah, BBC Radiophonic Workshop. That's what
Radiophonic,
yes, that's it. So yeah, we sort of looked at all of that, and so I'd like to play a little bit, not a lot, but just a bit of this here and there, because I just feel like there's something else. There's another sound world, and one of the modules I'm teaching at the school, one of the schools I teach, is looking at establishing, creating graphic scores and finding found sounds on our instruments, using our instruments in a non-conventional sense, and then sort of compiling them and using the constructs, the elements of music, pitch and rhythm and duration and such, and in articulation, but using them in a sort of using them in a non-conventional way to create a sound world to exemplify a storyline. So we come up with these stories, and then we create a musical composition to sort of to bring that story to life.
This is where the synthesizer is so good.
It's so good. But it's great to sample real-world sounds as well.
You can buy devices that mutilate samples.
Yeah, totally.
Quite cheap,
possibly. Yeah, absolutely. But it's great just to live play your instrument in a non-conventional way. You don't need the technique.
Yeah.
You can use a string instrument as a percussion instrument.
That would be very satisfying.
It's really interesting, and the kids really get into it.
I'm sure they do.
And it's quite liberating. It's quite emancipating
it's terrific.
because suddenly you're not bound by conventional technique. You can suddenly play your instrument in a way that's really unconventional. You can use it as a percussion instrument. You can just sort of make weird sounds with it. But it's all part
of the thing. It's the unpredictability almost.
Yeah, totally. So, you can construct these sort of sound worlds and layer it up and use all of the sort of the dramas presented and developed through the layering and such. And I think there's a lot to be said for this. And but look, what I'll finish with, though, is a performance of a work by Milton Babbitt before he went down this track.
Oh, really?
Because he was a conventional composer first, and he wrote this very beautiful mass in 1938. And it's marvellous. It's a magnificent work, and I thought, well, we've been hearing all of this really sort of esoteric stuff, and in his deep reasoning, and it's very exacting and very academic. But there's something behind it. There is, he's someone with a soul and with a connection to conventional processes as well. Yeah, and I think it's sort of nice to bring that to the fore.
I'd like to hear this.
Yeah, so look, we'll wind with it today, and I'll look forward to picking up the baton tomorrow, and more music we'll do. We'll go back to our usual format tomorrow, but and I'll be on time tomorrow. So, that'd be good.
There's a vague possibility that I could have something to do, but
sure.
I'll see how we go.
That's fine. If you're not there...
of what the family's doing.
Yeah, totally understand. And if you're busy, that's absolutely fine. There's no problem.
And next Friday night, I'm out of it because we're having a music night.
Oh, fabulous.
One of our 4 times a year music night.
Oh, sounds really good. Well, you have to give us maybe if you are out in the afternoon, we can have a talk about the what you're going to present.
If I could do that, or I could send you the...
Yeah, well, please do. I'd love to know what you're going to play. That'd be good. Yeah. All right. Okay, well, without any further ado, we'll hear some more Milton Babbitt, but this is a recording of a work called Music for the Mass, and it's actually a full liturgical mass, and it was written in 1938. So... let's hear this, and thanks, folks. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Frank. And we'll catch up at the next round.
You're out tomorrow.
Yes, indeed.
Keep listening, listener. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Cheers for now.
All the best.
Yep. heard a work entitled Music for the Mass, written in 1938 by Milton Babbitt, a composer who we've featured this afternoon. I'm vk3sl. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your company tomorrow afternoon.